Mattia Nelles, he's a political analyst. He joins us live from Germany at the moment. Mattia, firstly, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correct, and correct me if I'm wrong there. And I really appreciate you taking the time out and joining us on this very important issue with your insights on this. As things stand at the moment, and as you have the US President Joe Biden even trying to get to Europe to have a conversation. What is your sense in terms of how and the construct in which NATO can intervene at the moment to avoid further consequences to the world?
Well, NATO or NATO countries, we should say, are key guarantors of Ukraine's independence in the sense that they help the Ukrainians to defend themselves. And NATO leaders come together to discuss what further aid they can provide to Ukraine so that the war, in fact, does not spill over to neighboring countries. So I think NATO member states and other Western states play a crucial role now at this point of time.
Right. As far as Ukraine is concerned and Russia is concerned, they tried to have those peace talks and nothing really came out of those talks that they were trying to have, the negotiation table, and really it was just nothing. It didn't lead to any plausible solution. But they had that entire peace point plan as well, where there was a certain condition that Ukraine will not end up joining Russia being the main condition. How do you see that pan out? Do you think that's a plausible resolution to the said conflict?
Well, talks are the path out of this conflict, but let's be honest, the Russian 15-point plan or 12-point plan that was leaked was the Russian version of it, and we now know more and more about the Russian positions, and we know also increasingly more about the Ukrainian position, which includes the non-recognition of Crimea, the non-recognition of the occupied or the so-called People's Republics, fake republics in the country's east. So we see still very big gaps between the two positions, and it's very difficult to imagine how they can be bridged. But the Ukrainians are willing to bring chips to the table. Like you said, NATO membership, they're taking off the table, but as such, they want guarantees, security guarantees, that if Russia does withdraw and if Ukraine does never join NATO, how can their independence be guaranteed? And that's a crucial question. So I'm not entirely optimistic about the negotiation at this point of time.
What would be the ideal scenario in your point of view when these two nations are talking about peace point plans, etc.? What would be the utopian scenario?
The best case scenario is Russia immediately stopping its hostile activities on the ground and a ceasefire being announced that leads to real negotiations that eventually lead to a withdrawal of Russian troops. Yeah, this is the first thing we need. We need humanitarian relief on the ground for people in the besieged cities. We need not just private cars leaving those besieged cities like Sumy or Chernihiv. We need them to get aid from the outside world, and we need a ceasefire as soon as possible. And Ukraine needs to restore its independence and sovereignty. Otherwise, how can the country continue to live like this?
Which other countries do you think can intervene and mediate in this particular issue without there being catastrophic repercussions to the rest of the world?
You mean NATO?
Outside of NATO.
So
I mean, there are reports that say that there's going to be a unique role of an unlikely mediator like China. I do not want to believe it, but I wanted your opinion on it.
Right. Okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. Outside powers, by the way, like India and China, like Israel, can play a very important role. It's not that they can force Russia to concessions, but especially China has a big influence over Russia, and they could be part of the negotiated solutions. I don't think that they are seen by Ukraine as the only honest broker, but nevertheless, China, as I said, wields significant influence over Ukraine. So China is backed by Ukraine to play a bigger role, and so is Israel. We saw the president speak in Israel in the Knesset yesterday. So other outside powers do play a role, but they're unlikely to push Russia to make any meaningful concessions.
Right. And as far as the situation in Ukraine is concerned, there's been a huge humanitarian crisis. There have been war crimes that have been committed by Russia on the Ukrainians as well. Is the world really going to be taking cognizance of these going forward?
I surely hope so. So the atrocities, the sheer scope of the atrocities committed don't allow us, the world, India, Germany, to just move on, even if the hostilities cease. We're talking about entire cities being destroyed, and we have seen that since Aleppo, since Grozny, and it's basically in the middle of Europe. So we have to make sure that there is accountability. Otherwise, Russia and other powers might repeat such war crimes. So it's in our core interest to make sure that the Russians are held accountable for their atrocities by the European, by the International Criminal Court. So that's extremely important, in my opinion.
According to a news report, you've got Russia that has changed its strategy as a result of a failed blitzkrieg, citing high-ranking officials in the Biden administration. Russian troops probably will refuse to take Kiev, but will try to hold the southeastern territories of Ukraine. Mariupol, of course, as you know, refuses to surrender. How do you see this pan out?
Well, we saw these reports that the Russian offensive in the north and center basically grinded to a halt, and that's both good news and bad news, because Russia still is able to shoot and relentlessly shell the Ukrainian cities. And then we saw the reports that they're focusing now on the south. But even in the south, we see setbacks near Mykolaiv, Russian forces being pushed towards Kherson. And yes, Mariupol is under brutal siege, but I don't see a south scenario also being sustainable. Because without the further territories, the Ukrainians can regroup and can attack the positions of the Russians in the south. So even militarily, you ask yourself, what is Russia's end game? And are they going to be able to occupy and reign over the territory in the south with such big resistance, even if it's peaceful, but still big resistance on the ground?
All right, leave it at that. Thanks so much for taking the time out and joining us on this particular issue.